Hello and welcome to LexisNexis Risk Solutions Trust live event in London. I'm Hannah Wallace, and kindly joining me now in the studio is Niall McCann, Policy Consultant, Legal Identity at the UN Development Programme. Niall, thank you very much for taking the time out of the event to come speak with us.
Lovely to be here.
Now we're speaking about a fascinating topic, state control over identity, at the heart of a lot of discussions over the course of the event. And really where I want to begin is talking about a big area of debate, actually, which is whether absolutely everyone has a legal right to an identity. So let's get your thoughts on that first.
Well, yes is the blunt answer. This has been well established by a number of resolutions that have been passed by the UN's Economic and Social Council, which basically within the United Nations system has the mandate to set standards around identity, and in particular core civil registration of birth and death. And it's been established by many resolutions, but also by international legal treaties, such as the Convention on the Rights of the Child, for example. Everybody that is born is entitled to have their birth registered and a certificate issued attesting to same as quickly as possible after the birth has taken place. So every man, woman, child and others on the planet that is born is entitled to that as per international law. The fact that that's not achieved, however, obviously is a major source of concern.
Yeah.
And therefore we estimate, and the World Bank certainly estimates, that there are now still somewhere in the region of 700 million to 1 billion people on the planet, which is almost 1 in 7 of the global population, that do not have an identity that is recognized by the state. And oftentimes that is because their birth was either never registered, or it was registered but they never received a certificate attesting to same, or for whatever reason they have lost, had their documents destroyed or whatever. So we have these hundreds of millions of people then living without the ability to prove who they are, and all of the knock-on effects, unfortunately, that has results in people not being able to register businesses, register a mobile phone, claim any inheritance rights, vote, many other rights, which leaves many people, all these people, without the ability to live as citizens in the modern world.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much for setting the scene for us there. And I think over the course of the event, those challenges you've mentioned so far, we're going to be looking about how to address those. But bearing that in mind then, how does that extend into digital identity then? Now,
that's a complex issue, because remember, by the way, also, while everybody has the right to legal identity, a very interesting sub-question is, does everybody have the obligation to have a legal identity? And I would be one of these people that would argue that pretty much nobody, other than people in witness protection programs as sanctioned by courts, should somehow be able to come off the grid and live without any form of official or legal identity, because that doesn't lead well to a society in which everyone is contributing as one, everyone is paying taxes, paying social insurance contributions, etc. So that's kind of a very interesting side question. On the issue of digital IDs, there is no global, certainly at the level of international law or international standards, there is no obligation for states to provide a digital version of a legal identity to their citizens or other resident foreigners. However, clearly in the last number of decades, we are moving towards that, and quite a number of states, India would probably be the pioneer in this, have moved towards asserting or issuing digital IDs to their citizens and other resident foreigners that might be living on the territory. One of the big questions, however, is should those digital identities be linked to their core civil registration of births, deaths, marriages, adoptions, divorces, etc. Because if they aren't, then there's the possibility that you, Hannah Wallace, could have a birth certificate saying your identity is one thing, but then later on in life have a digital ID issued by government for whatever reason then with a different identity. And what are the consequences legally, etc., of somebody moving in throughout life with identities that do not necessarily match up? That's a huge challenge for an awful lot of countries, and in particular we find it's probably anecdotal. I'm sure there's scope for a lot more research in this area, but for governments that have issued digital ID programs, has that a knock-on effect then on their focus and the resources they put towards ensuring birth registration, and in particular death registration? If you're not linking digital IDs with death registration, for example, the possibility is that each day as we go by, you could have more and more dead people registered in a digital ID program, and there could be political knock-on effects then where people begin to question the authenticity, the integrity of any digital ID database that has more and more and more dead people in it on a daily basis, with the possibility, of course, people will ask, well, are those dead people able to do things such as vote, such as claim ghost pensions, or whatever, you know? So ensuring that there's a linkage between the legal identity issued at birth via birth registration and birth certificates with any digital ID programs that a government may issue later on in a person's life, ensuring that those two are matched up and linked is something that in the UN we're very, very pro, but we're conscious that there are a number of people that might be anti that, because it suggests then that we would have some sort of centralized system where governments have the monopoly on issuing identities from birth all the way through death. And of course there's a lot of pushback on that from the private sector, from a lot of civil society groups throughout the world.
And does that open the door to the problem of identity theft as well you're talking about?
Well, it's fascinating now because there's a number of ways to look at that. For example, if we have what we would call centralized ID database, it does create the honeypot idea for hackers who might decide, well, if I can hack that identity, if all of a person's identity data is in one place and I manage to hack that, well then I have stolen that person's identity across a number of different public and private spheres. If identities are decentralized, if Hannah Wallace is registered 10 different times in 10 different databases with potentially 10 different digital markers or whatever that allow her to be separately registered, well then if one of those identities is hacked, it doesn't necessarily mean that the other ones are hacked. The problem, of course, however, if we are talking about you being registered 10 times or 20 times or 50 times across different databases, that is extremely expensive. That is extremely difficult for governments to manage in terms of the complexity of ensuring all these databases are up to place. And of course, there has to be some kind of mechanism that allows the state to know that Hannah registered in the tax database is the same Hannah that's registered in Social Security, with the same passport, with a driving license, in the voter registration database, across all of these databases. There has to be a means for a state to ensure that a human being is the same human being when that human being is registered in a number of places. And if the person has somehow, for whatever reasons, different ID variables. If I'm Niall McCann in one database, but I'm Niall Joseph McCann in another database, there has to be a means for the government to trace who I am, to know that that's the same person. And of course there are a lot of civil society advocates, privacy advocates, that don't like that idea. They don't like that idea that the state is somehow tracking you or tracing you across a number of different databases. And that's one of the challenges we're here to discuss today.
It's fascinating and indeed quite daunting as well. And you've highlighted there a number of challenges already. And the last one I want to end on is the additional challenge that the pandemic has presented for governments managing digital identities as well. So what are your thoughts on that, and what are those challenges?
Look, I think post-pandemic, if the pandemic did a lot of things, one of the things it very much did is highlight just how much control a state can have over people's movements, both physically but also digitally and online. And there's been a lot of pushback post-pandemic about the extent of state control over digital IDs. I feel like going forward, we are inevitably moving towards a world where people will be living more and more of their lives digitally, and therefore will try to assert to the government more and more of their self-defined digital identities. For example, whatever version of the metaverse or a metaverse that we may move towards, if you are able to generate more and more of your economic activity online, whether that be living in Decentraland or other sort of metaverses where you're using self-generated tokens or tokens, cryptocurrency tokens, etc. If you're generating more and more of your economic life online with a digital identity that you yourself have invented and come up with, well then what is to stop you saying to the state, look, I don't really care about the person that was registered when I was born. I don't really care about the driving license and the name and the gender or the date of birth that's issued in that document. This is who I am. I demand that the state recognize my self-asserted and self-generated digital ID. I think we're inevitably moving towards a world where that will happen more and more. And of course there is an obligation on the state on behalf of its citizens to ensure that there is integrity in identity systems. Now, if more and more people are saying to the government, hide my date of birth, it's none of your business, my gender is what I decide it is and not what you recorded when I was born, my name is whoever I say I am, well then that does, I think, raise very, very large political questions, philosophical questions about the boundaries of where you are who you say you are versus who the state says you are as recorded when you were born. And the state does have an obligation, I think, certainly, to ensure that things like statistical systems, for example, they're accurate. The Irish economist David McWilliams is always saying this, that the real sign of development in a society is not necessarily gross domestic product, total factor productivity per human being, etc. It's the quality of statistical systems, the ability of the state to say at any one point in time, well, this is our birth rate, this is our fertility rate, this is our mortality rate. And also then other statistics like, well, this is our rates of cervical cancer, testicular cancer, all of these various diseases. Now, if the state isn't managing identity systems that have strong and robust identity variables, such as a person's sex, such as a person's date of birth, such as a person's name, the state isn't able to manage those those statistical systems. And I think sometimes we overlook the challenges and the enormity of responsibility we place on governments to ensure that those type of statistical systems are in place properly. And it's something I kind of wish people would think more and more about when we're simply arguing sometimes, well, that I should be able to control my identity data, I'm in charge of my own identity, I am who I say I am. It's a challenge we probably haven't got to the end of yet.
And as you say, it opens the door to a number of theoretical, political, ethical questions that I wish we could go into today, Niall, but we're going to have to leave it there for now. I'm going to let you get back to the event, and I hope some of those questions are answered today on the panel sessions. But look, thank you very much for your time. It's been fascinating.
Thanks very much, Anna.